AI, artificial intelligence, is everywhere. You probably just had an ad about AI, Google's Pixel, Apple Intelligence, ChatGPT, or an ad wanting you to chat with an AI anime girl. At this point, I'm assuming you've watched Eddie Burback or Kalen Conrad's videos, or this amazing video by People Make Games that covers in depth Microsoft's partnership with Israel, and how Microsoft is complicit in genocide, as it has provided Israel AI technological aid, enabling the Israeli state to mass surveil Palestinians and Lebanese people. Think of this video as an extension to People Make Games, but a historical one that looks at the history of surveillance and ties it back to the present, to AI surveillance, and an AI that is for genocide. There's also the fact that I hate both generative AI and AI surveillance to the same degree that I hate those who support AI. People like the Rat King, the Nazi AI slop lover, Asmongold. We live in a world where surveillance is the norm. There are children who have been born and raised under the watchful eye of surveillance. These children are raised in an environment where surveillance is the norm. It's been rationalized to death, justified with reasoning that the state will never target ordinary civilians, just terrorists. But this distinction can change with a snap of a finger, where ordinary citizens and asylum seekers turn from people who have human rights and dignity to suspects. This is what human rights scholars call a state of exception, where human rights are stripped, and the state can question, detain, and torture a suspect without any reason, just suspicion. Most who walk out of this ordeal walk out questioning if human rights even exist. But underneath the known cases are those who are detained, prosecuted by the state, and tortured under false accusations of being terrorist. There's a long history of this, and it all connects back to surveillance. The aim of this video is not to instill fear into your hearts. I don't want to spread doomerism or defeatism. A lot of viewers might feel a tinge of paranoia because for the last 30 years, we've been subjected to daily mass surveillance of our lives. And yet the extent of surveillance that is aimed at us is a sliver compared to Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank. It is a sliver compared to my people in Lebanon. The aim of this video is to teach those who are unaware and oblivious of the threat of AI and our government's active actions to increase their surveillance with AI. I also want to give people hope that we could fight against AI. We can destroy and block the construction of AI data centers. We can reject AI and learn from those who went underground when they were subjected to surveillance. We could learn something from the Mujahideen in Lebanon and Palestine. I also wanted to come after Asmongold after I made my video on Dubai. Asmongold has a lot of fans because they too want AI to be used to spy and massacre and deport Muslims. So if you're an AI hater and an Asmongold hater like I am, make sure you like, comment, and share this video around. In the West, there's a growing concern about the negativities and harms of generative AI. People chatting and seeking therapy from ChatGPT. ChatGPT and other AIs openly telling people to harm themselves. There are men out there who are dating AI anime girls. There are boomers out there who are addicted to AI. Boomers who find joy uploading all their family pictures to AI, feeding it more targets to surveil, and adding more people to its database. The news these days keeps reporting about how AI won't steal your jobs. No! AI will be amazing for the economy. There's a real concern for how much water and pollution AI data centers bring and how AI pollutes the mind. emptying the mind of free-thinking thoughts and creativity. But our focus today is on how AI kills, how AI is used as a weapon of war, a tool for committing genocide. The ongoing genocide of Palestinians has brought a lot of attention towards AI warfare. People out there worry that the technology that is often referred to as being tested on Palestinians will return home. It'll boomerang back. The concern with these people is not about how many Palestinians, Yemenis, and Lebanese people have already been massacred by AI, but that AI surveillance will eventually be used here in the West, that it'll harm them. The sad and terrifying reality is all Five Eye countries and more already have surveillance networks that can target you. Some countries started collecting data 26 years ago, while others like Canada and the US already have historic systems of surveillance. Systems that have been used in the past and the present to hunt migrants, Arabs, Black, and Indigenous peoples. The ICE raids in America are not a new phenomenon. The UK has a criminal record of abducting and deporting migrants and asylum seekers. Before the recent upsurge of deportations, the UK used a surveillance model referred to as a Surveillant assemblage, a model I'll explain in more depth in part 3, but to brief you, Kevin D. Haggerty and Richard V. Erickson in the year 2000 set out to make sense of the changes in the UK surveillance practices, and thus dubbed the model the UK was using as a Surveillant assemblage. Haggerty and Erickson reveal, with technological advancements, the UK was now able to unite different flows of data and have them work together to create what they refer to as digital data doubles of a person. Back in the 2000s, this was telecommunications, SMS messaging, and internet communications. However, back in the 2000s, this model was in its early stages and was advanced after 9/11. In 2018, Sanjay Sharma and Jasbinder Najjar re-examined the Surveillant assemblage, tracing how it had changed. Sharma, Najjar, and Jeffrey Monaghan found that surveillant assemblages were using algorithms, that this algorithm could be used to more accurately predict capture terrorists or prevent an attack before it ever happened. But behind closed doors, the model was monitoring flows of data of racialized people, scanning them and profiling them. The algorithm was thus used here to determine who was a threat and who was considered safe. But all three scholars found some big flaws in the model and Western surveillance. The model firstly failed and could not predict or prevent terrorist attacks. It was unable to find terrorists. Secondly, it was found that the algorithm was following racist patterns of its programmers and was actually being used by the UK government to watch, detain, and deport migrants and asylum seekers. This system, this Surveillant assemblage, is currently active in all countries, and it's being paired with AI. The fact is, AI surveillance is already in place in most Western countries, or the network is currently being upgraded. For my American viewers, Black people in the US have had this surveillance on them since the time of slavery, and it has not relented. It's just most people are oblivious to state surveillance practices, and people don't really think about it until it becomes unignorable, until they themselves become its target. For Palestinians, Lebanese, Yemeni, Iraqi, Indigenous, and Black peoples have been under the watchful eye of the West for over 20 years. The AI surveillance Israel uses in occupied Palestine and Lebanon to commit its genocides differs from the ones America, the UK, and Germany have built for themselves. Israel uses American companies to store the data for them, and other countries to house the data, such as the Netherlands and the Arab Gulf states. Microsoft, Meta, Apple, Amazon, Planter, and Google all have Palestinian and Lebanese blood on their hands. These American companies are complicit in the massacre of thousands. AI surveillance here records, stores, and tracks everything from Palestinians and Lebanese people. It marks a target on everyone. by creating profiles and histories. It is an AI designed for genocide. It is an AI that follows American, UK, and Germanic surveillance models, where every person in Lebanon and occupied Palestine is a valid military target because they are all terrorists. In my opinion, every data center that aids Israel or America should be targeted and destroyed. They are centers of genocide and death. This is a technology that shouldn't exist. And people in the West may be terrified by the idea that they too are in a data center, that they too are considered and marked as terrorists. But the AI system is not indestructible. The apathy Westerners wield may make them think of themselves first, but in this current moment, AI is being used to massacre and kill Palestinians and my people in Lebanon. Boycotting Microsoft, Google, Apple, and Meta is the least you can do. To be against AI, for me, means destroying AI. This destruction of AI will save Palestinians and Lebanese people who are victims to Lavender AI, to drones that use data from these data centers to pinpoint a target, and the daily raids into Gaza and the West Bank, where they kidnap, quote-unquote, valid military targets who might have rightfully exposed the crimes of the Israeli regime. So yeah, I think we should be even more anti-AI. Hey, Lost Futures here. I just watched the first cut of this video, and I noticed I failed to mention something. I was too focused on the present, on AI being used to massacre Palestinians and Lebanese people, and I didn't talk about the history of surveillance in occupied Palestine. In part 2, I nudge at the idea that Israel, like many colonial and slave states before it, uses a pass system. But I don't ever mention that this apartheid system of surveillance began all the way back in 1949 with ID cards. I don't speak about how Palestinians have been under surveillance since Palestine was occupied in 1948. That since 1948, there has been physical infrastructure of surveillance with manned checkpoints, physical blockades, restricted roads, and the apartheid separation wall. This infrastructure was upgraded over time, incorporating high-tech surveillance. I fail to mention that Israel was one of the first states in the entire world to deploy the surveillance assemblage. Predictive policing of Palestinians began in 2017. The gathering of mass amounts of data on Palestinians skyrocketed after that, as in 2019, Israel was partnering with Palantir to create its AI Targets Administrative Division. With it came Blue Wolf and later Red Wolf, both designed with Palantir's targeting AI that was incorporated into Israelis' core site. Israel also has Project Pegasus, a tool that injects spyware into Palestinian phones or laptops. So at points of this video, I'll talk lengths about the surveillance assemblage, but I want you to know right here and right now that we've already moved past that model. We're in the times of a genocidal AI surveillance assemblage that is currently being deployed by Israel to commit its genocides in both Palestine and Lebanon. I'm sorry for this brief disruption and for making such huge mistakes. Surveillance as we know it today did not manifest after 9/11. It's been around since the times of slavery. Most historians of surveillance use Foucault as a foundation. They gravitate towards Foucault because of his ideas and theories around the panopticon. Foucault does deserve some credit for his contributions to the field, but if you read his books, they are situated in white European views. For Foucault, the history of surveillance starts with white people, with the plague in the hospital. But like Simone Brown, I don't vibe with this white French creep. Foucault, like his creepy critical theory peers, offers the reader theory, but doesn't ground it in the present. Foucault offers people mountains and mountains and mountains of theory, but doesn't ever provide a way to counter surveillance or the panopticon. So we're throwing Foucault into the fire because this man deserves to burn in hell. Instead, the foundations of this history will rely on Simone Brown, Frantz Fanon, and George Jackson, who offer a decolonial Marxist perspective. One that states that surveillance is tied to capitalist and colonial fears of armed resistance and violence. In her book, Black Matter, on the surveillance of blackness, Simone Brown argues that modern surveillance began with slave ships and the plantation, that the slave ship and the plantation were the first attempts to create a panopticon, a mechanism to surveil and punish those who dare to break their chains and fight for liberation. Simone Brown correctly states slave ships such as the Brooks were floating prisons, as enslaved people were not only forced into mere inches of space, but were under the watchful eyes of soldiers through the Middle Passage. They were then taken to a plantation, another prison, and forced to work. Brown, throughout her book, illustrates different layers of surveilling blackness and black bodies. The brand being the first to dehumanize enslaved people, marking them as mere property to a sovereign. The brand burning onto the flesh to communicate to the enslaved that they were no longer human, but marked beings, so that if they dared to run, they would be returned to their masters. The ship as a prison, a passage so grueling and deadly it would break minds and resistance towards white slavers. The plantation guards and slave catchers, early police and ICE agents, tasked with punishing slaves for whatever reason they could come up with, for not working, for talking, for smiling, for laughing, for praying, for running, and for resisting. Simone Brown then introduced a method of surveillance that exploded my brain and would later be used by apartheid states like Canada, South Africa, and Israel. A pass system. The pass gave enslaved people permission to leave the plantation. White slavers had to grant their gracious permission so slaves could just leave their prisons. If an enslaved person was found without a pass, they would be whipped and dragged back to the plantation, or they would be legally lynched. Pass systems, be it in the plantation or colonial apartheid states, aim to cement the idea that the enslaved or indigenous people does not belong in white society, that their rightful place is in the plantation, the reservation, or in the Gaza Strip. It is the root of an apartheid system, and its practices are deeply rooted in the surveillance of bodies, a complete restriction of movement and action. The pass system for Brown is in reality a foundational practice, one that will transform into passports. This becomes vital when studying the Book of Negroes, a book that biometrically documented slaves who escaped from the US to British colonies and European lands with a birch pass. The Black Book, a ledger of so-called escaped slaves, was sought after because the white American slavers wanted reparations or return of their escaped property. The detailed biometric documentation of the black body by the British illustrates that some Britons thought and sympathized with white American slavers, but enslaved people resisted and escaped the slave hunts. This is not to say British lands were free lands. Canada and European countries maintained their slave systems and kept trading slaves even after abolition. All these early practices of surveillance brings us to the question of why. The white race was supposed to be superior. White people such as Richard Legion Gent wrote paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs about how black people were naturally subservient and obedient. So why were there layers of surveillance? Why did white people have to watch their towns and enforce sundown laws? The root of it is settler colonial paranoia and insecurity, but there's also the fact that the injustice of slavery, of colonization and imperialism would be met with violence, with violent uprisings, and a dream of liberation. A historical example would be Haiti. Haiti was first invaded by the Spanish, who committed a genocide on its native population. On the foundation of genocide, early plantations were built, like the ones built in Barbados. Both Richard Legion Gent and Emily Now give us a glimpse into early resistance against both slavery and surveillance. In Barbados, enslaved people rose and tried to burn the plantations to the ground, and in Haiti, they resisted Columbus's son and aimed to dismantle the plantation system. Although in both cases the white colonial slavers put down each uprising with violence, the fire for liberation did not burn out. In Haiti, resistance continued once the French invaded and took over the island, exporting over 800,000 enslaved people to the island. Violence and surveillance were used to turn Haiti into the most prosperous plantation island in the Caribbean. However, even with this cruel system in place, the Haitians had the courage to rise and fight. Even before Fanon was born into this world, they understood that colonialism and enslavement would only yield when the knife is at its throat. That to attain liberation, Europeans must be expelled and killed. That liberation does not come from nonviolence, from praying that one day the white slavers would turn benevolent and just end slavery. No, Haitians organized, armed themselves, and fought. They expelled and killed the French who lorded over them and occupied Haiti. Haiti, an island of slaves, even took on Napoleon's army and defeated one of the world's richest empires, attaining liberation, attaining freedom from slavery and from the watchful white gaze of their slavers. Thus, rooted in early surveillance was paranoia, insecurity, and fear. Yes, surveillance is about power. Yes, it's about social control and policing. But as it was in the past, it's also used to instill fear into our minds, to psychologically prevent us from taking action, so that we police ourselves, so that we are the good Muslim, the good Palestinian, and the good Indigenous. We must rebel against this aspect of surveillance, too. In March 2026, the CBC broke a story that was long suspected. In the article called How the RCMP Spied on Indigenous Organizations, Brett Forrester reveals three important things about Canadian surveillance. First, Canada, like most colonial and imperial states, lock their archives to keep their genocidal crimes hidden, and thus force and pressure was required to declassify these surveillance documents. Secondly, concrete evidence of Canadian surveillance on Indigenous peoples was revealed publicly. It wasn't just surveillance. The Canadian state actively prevented Indigenous peoples from organizing for over 70 years. It was sabotage. And third, the RCMP's surveillance of Indigenous peoples is ongoing. Canada has two main agencies when it comes to surveillance, the RCMP and CSIS. Although what was discovered is shocking to most, the creation of the Canadian surveillance apparatus did not begin 70 years ago, but 150 years ago with the Indian Act of 1876. The Indian Act is one of the most racist legal documents in existence. Indigenous peoples of Canada were not considered as human beings deserving equal rights or additional rights, but subjects, little idiotic children who were under the care of the British monarchy. To be an Indian meant you had to verify and prove you were Indian. Thus, a registration process was put into place, a process that would allow the state to monitor who was in and out of reservations. There were also racist laws like, if you choose to leave a reserve, you can't return. If you don't register, you lose the legal title of being Indian. If an Indigenous woman marries a white man, they immediately lose their legal title. The Indian Act was the foundation of Canadian apartheid, and the past system came with it. White settlements, towns, and later cities were off limits to Indigenous peoples. If an indigenous person was found after sunset, they would be beaten, imprisoned, or killed. Vast lands where indigenous peoples hunted and traveled were now off limits, and they were imprisoned in reservations, only able to leave with a pass. With permission. Both the Indian Act and the pass system were thus tools of surveillance, because the colonial Canadian state feared that if indigenous peoples unified, they could make the settler state crumble. With this early system of surveillance, the Canadian state tried its best to monitor each reserve with an Indian agent, while maintaining the myth that indigenous peoples vanished or went extinct. What's even more odd is that the Canadian state burnt its records of the pass system. Maybe, just maybe, it's because apartheid South Africa was inspired by it. Finally, the Canadian state kidnapped indigenous children and locked them up in residential schools, where they were taught how to be white. The aims of these schools was to civilize the Indian, or to put it plainly, to kill the Indian in the child. In these prison schools was also surveillance, and if a kid tried to run back home, back to their parents, they'd be thrown into solitary confinement. Kids did not die in these prison schools. They were murdered and buried in cold, unmarked graves. Indigenous children were also sexually and physically abused by the church, by priests and nuns. So if you ever hear a Canadian boast that they conquered the West with non-violence, with peace and diplomacy, that Canadian colonialism is different from American or Israeli settler colonialism, tell them to shut the fuck up. The Canadian state was just as genocidal as Israel. It was just as apartheid as Israel. And it is as colonial as Israel. And as racist and fascist like America is. Canada had, and still has, their own KKK. We also got the Jewish KKK. Back on the matter of surveillance, the Canadian state was an early adopter of the fascist idea of the enemy within. Thus, since 1876 to 2026, it has maintained its surveillance of indigenous peoples. Like the settlers in occupied Palestine, Canadians will never belong to Turtle Island. The settler will always fear the native. They will always fear resistance to colonialism. Canadians may try to use force. They may try to argue that since their settler forefathers settled on this land 150 years ago, that this land now belongs to them. That all of the surveillance and genocide is justified. But none of these claims are correct. Settlers do not belong in Turtle Island. And even with over 100 years of surveillance, they still don't feel secure. They are still haunted, and indigenous resistance is still alive. Surveillance in the 20th century is often covered through a timeline of laws and technological advancements. You know, the ability to intercept and decode telegraphs, wiretap phones, and the introduction of biometric data like fingerprints. In the near end of the century, we have technology that we are now well aware of, with the creation of GPS and the internet, both military inventions that could be tracked by the US and later Western countries. This is a history most people are aware of, but who this surveillance was aimed at often gets ignored or omitted. The first victims of this surveillance were Black and Indigenous people and foreigners. In the early 20th century, white people, as they are today, were obsessed with security. The justification for surveillance was national security and defending the colonial or Western state from the enemy within. The First World War attempted to give this logic a valid, lawful justification. But even before World War I, Canada and the US only accepted white immigrants. They prioritized a eugenics-based immigration system that wished to keep the state pure and strong. So they invented a racial hierarchy of whiteness. The German and British on the top, and the Irish and Eastern Europeans were like lesser whites. In World War I, it became apparent that surveillance was not just tracking enemy Germans or Austrians, but it was being used to track and detain unwanted foreigners who didn't fit into the mold of whiteness or opposed capitalism. Most of the Europeans who were interned during the First World War were communists or leftists. A brief example. Canada today gives Ukrainians millions and millions and millions, and oh my god, how many millions are we going to send to Ukraine? But after the Russian Revolution of 1917, the Canadian state began interning Ukrainians. Were these Ukrainians enemies of war? No! They were leftists who opposed the war and were organizing strikes, like the Winnipeg General Strike of 1919 that shut down the entire city. Once the Bolsheviks seized power in 1917, Canadian and American surveillance was more afraid of communism than the enemies overseas. People often talk about McCarthyism or the Red Scare following World War II, but the Red Scare and the surveillance of communism began in 1917. It has to be said and underlined and highlighted that Western countries were more worried about communism than fascism. In apartheid Canada and America following World War I, you got the KKK running around, you got Canadian and American Nazis running around, celebrating Mussolini and Hitler. Britain had Mosley, Spain got Franco. Fascism was not the enemy of capitalist Western states. The surveillance of the 20th century was geared around hunting communists and creating this idiotic idea that communism should be feared more than fascism. And it's because, to be frank here, America has always been fascist. Whites in Canada and Europe actually vibed and adored fascism. They saw communism as a real threat to the Western imperial system the Western world had relied on. The Russian Revolution showed the world that a people could rise, kill their king, and actually seize the state, transforming it from a state that sent millions to their deaths and reaped profit from imperialism as the people starved to death, into one that actually cared about normal, suffering people and workers. The 1917 Russian Revolution showed the world that a different future was possible. Oh, I feel like we've been talking about white people for a while now. After the end of World War II, the world was split into two, East and West. After the end of World War II, America became the dominant fascist power of the world. In opposition to this fascism rose courageous black revolutionaries. The surveillance of the Black Panther Party must be included in this long history because it shows people what is often hidden. America had its eyes on Panther leaders like Huey P. Newton, Fred Hampton, and George Jackson. The FBI pigs went to the lengths of drugging Fred Hampton, raiding his apartment in Chicago, and executed him. 2 shots in the head. George Lester Jackson was 18 when he was arrested, accused of stealing a mere $71. The young man was imprisoned, beaten, and tortured. Despite the blood in his eyes, Jackson met Marx and Fanon in prison. Revolutionaries changed the young man, making him into a revolutionary leader inside prison. He extensively wrote of his fellow comrades who the American pigs kidnapped and imprisoned, warns people outside of prison that fascism is already in America, that the repression that is so feared is already here. George Jackson was murdered by pigs. Even if you argue that the Black Panther Party was a threat to American national security, it was in reality a valid revolutionary stance of resistance towards American fascism, to police brutality, to apartheid, Jim Crow, to the KKK, and white people in general. Even outside the Black Panther Party, the US tracked and threatened figures like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. The FBI 100% assassinated them both. The surveillance of blackness has never ceased. The oppression of black people in the US has never ceased. Yet despite this heavy surveillance and repression, the Panthers teach us that we shouldn't give in to fear and kneel to the fascist state. That resistance is dead. That is a liberal idea. It is a liberal mindset to normalize fascist surveillance and rationalize it by telling people the state is just looking for bad guys. Fanon and George Jackson deny this liberalism. Both understood that surveillance targets all who oppose fascism and colonialism. Take the words of these revolutionaries to heart and put a blade to the throat of fascism. The words of Fanon and George Jackson echo in the present as we come face to face with an AI surveillant assemblage. Historians often mark the 1950s as the moment in time when the West turned its gaze towards the Arab world and saw them as a threat. In truth, Western surveillance existed in the Middle East prior to the 1950s. In World War I, for an example, T.E. Lawrence of Arabia was sent to the Arabs as a spy, reporting his findings back to the British and spreading myths and lies about Palestine being a barren, empty land. After the First World War, European countries increased their surveillance in their Arab colonies, fearing revolts and violent uprisings. When the Zionist European Jewish settlers arrived in Palestine and began building their exclusively Jewish settlements, surveillance was crucial. Like America, Canada, and French-occupied Algeria, the colonization of Palestine came hand in hand with surveillance of Palestinians. Thomas Suarez has a great book about Jewish terrorism before and during the Nakba, and how Jewish settlers documented and surveilled the land they would set out to commit genocide on. As I've said before, the settler feels paranoid because they do not belong. They are foreigners, pretending to be native. So no, the West have had their eyes on West Asia for over a century. Linking past to present, however, the same rhetoric remains with advanced technology. The Palestinian, or Lebanese, or Syrian, or Iraqi, or Yemeni fighting American imperialism will always be characterized as terrorist. They will always be reported by Western media as the irrational actor. This rhetoric has been around since the 1990s, as The Atlantic even featured the racist Islamophobic Bernard Lewis with "The Roots of Muslim Rage." This rhetoric may seem non-important for those in tech, people who are currently battling surveillance, but rhetoric, racism, and the subjective is what drives surveillance. It's used to justify and rationalize the apparatus, while also being the foundation for surveillance systems and algorithms. Fear and irrational subjective thought is crucial to the normalization of surveillance. It's why you have the pro-AI, Nazi, rat king Asmongold going around and spewing genocidal rhetoric, calling Palestinians animals, calling for the death and massacre of Iranians, that migrants in America deserve to be dragged out of their houses and imprisoned by ICE, celebrating when ICE hunts people down or kills them. AI bros and people like Asmongold revel in the fascism of surveillance and American imperialism. However, before 9/11, there existed the white Western fear of the foreign Arab. Immigration policies show us that Western countries had a criteria of which Arabs were allowed entry and were accepted or tolerated. In that, Western countries mostly accepted educated Arabs who could benefit their economies. An example would be my dad. At the young age of 17, he was conscripted and became a trained soldier in the Syrian army, but he used his mandatory service to gain a medical degree. In 1989, he decided to move to Canada, as he felt the weight of Western sanctions. It was Western imperialism that forced my dad, who loved Damascus with all of his heart, to move. In Canada, his medical license became void, and thus for 10 years, he struggled to learn a new language and pass his pharmacy exams. Written in his notebooks are notes about what to say to pass the citizenship exam, where he wrote his motivation to move and degraded his country of birth. He had to tell the white Canadians who judged him how Syria was a place that lacked freedom. Although my dad wrote these words, I don't believe he meant them. He never became white, never really became Canadian. In his heart, and how he expresses himself around his friends, there still lies a piece of Damascus. But it showed me the effects of the judgmental white gaze that assesses if a Arab is worthy of citizenship or if they should be deported. Also, after 9/11, for some weird ass reason, my dad, a man who lived a quiet, peaceful life in Canada, studying his ass off for 11 years, was put on a no-fly list, anchoring him forever in this white hell. As I noted in part 1, the Surveillant Assemblage, the system or model that unified separate surveillance systems into one, was created before 9/11. Using this model, Europe, the US, and later Canada unified streams of data, linking telephone, SMS messaging, iris scans, CCTV, GPS, and internet communications together. Haggerty and Erickson in 2000 placed this concept into the spotlight, envisioning an Orwellian world, throwing out the possibility that with the convergence of all these flows, states will be able to hunt anyone, as the human body itself becomes another form of data. Sanjay Sharma and Jasbinder Najjar in 2018 push and expand on the concept of the surveillance assemblage by focusing their study of research on its effects on Muslims in the UK. Focal to their research was on the fear of radicalization, this idea that Islam is not compatible with the West, and that within the West, Muslims are radicalizing the young, creating, as George Bush said, ticking time bombs. Sharma and Najjar explain how 9/11 sped and was used as a justification to advance the system, and the UK advertised the surveillance system with Prevent. However, as Jeffrey Monaghan and Colin Burke note, governments were falsely advertising surveillance, proclaiming that it will prevent an attack from ever happening, it'll capture all of the terrorists, and kept trying to rationalize the surveillance with the assurance that it will keep the Western world safe. What was actually taking place was a rapid militarization of surveillance. Monaghan centers his paper on the concept of security traps, focusing his study on the Canadian desire to be free from fear. However, as Monaghan finds, this desire becomes a security trap in itself. Monaghan's article is very dense. Like, look at it. It's all crunched up. But when I first read it, it took me a good week to understand exactly what he was trying to say. Colin Burke and Simone Brown, on the other hand, take the surveillance assemblage and focus on the surveillance of blackness. The conclusion these researchers arrive at are similar, but Sharma and Najjar stand out because they're the ones who get into the technicalities of the assemblage. They first found that the algorithm used for this assemblage was foundationally racist, as it racially profiled Muslims. How can an algorithm be racist though? What it came down to was what the UK government deemed as a threat or deviant. And so when the algorithm was fed information of people's everyday lives and behaviors, and when it began creating profiles, it would start flagging people as safe, risky, or deviant. The algorithm here was designed around the idea that whiteness was the norm and was tasked in finding terrorists, and thus it was aimed to racially profile all Muslims. Thus, surveillance assemblages gave states the ability to hunt and track and detain anyone who was suspected as terrorist or radical. But who is a terrorist? Were all the people the algorithm flagged really terrorists? Am I a terrorist? Are you a terrorist? No. 99% were normal, ordinary migrants who fled war, who were Muslim. The system was an utter failure at finding these so-called terrorists and preventing attacks. It was ineffective and irrational. However, the pretense, the framing of, we're just looking for terrorists, was and will always be a smokescreen for British or American or Canadian or Germanic or Israeli fascistic racism and xenophobia. Although these scholars point to fear and insecurity as a thing that motivated these states to deploy militarized surveillance, it is in my opinion that Western regimes would have naturally reached this level of surveillance from white supremacy and their fascist tendencies alone. The reason I've been so focused on the surveillance assemblage isn't because I find the study of surveillance fascinating and horrifying, and I love to nerd out about this shit, but I now realize that this system was the foundation for AI surveillance. AI surveillance requires massive and disgustingly huge facilities to house their data. As others before me have discovered, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, Opera, Openai, and Planter have been collecting data on Palestinians. The data collected in these data centers are not fragmented, but assembled, creating profiles on Palestinians who are resisting Israel's genocide. And with this surveillance, the Israeli genocidal state is able to target any Palestinian it deems as terrorist. It is a complete criminalization of Palestinian people. The same logic, the same rationalization, the same rhetoric Western regimes used to justify their surveillance assemblages was adopted by Israel. However, Israel is using AI to commit genocide and expand its apartheid colonial state into the West Bank. How many kids have been killed because they said, "Fuck Israel"? How many men and women have been dragged out of their houses because they posted something on Facebook? How many journalists were murdered because they used WhatsApp as a method of communication? It is a fascistic regime. The YouTube channel People Make Games exposes how Microsoft is complicit in genocide and how AI kills and has killed thousands of Palestinians. All credit and praise for People Make Games for standing up and covering such an important topic. But I question those workers in these data centers who operate this AI and send profiles and profiles and profiles and profiles of Palestinians to a genocidal state. How can you fucking drive to work and operate such a murderous machine? Everything Sharma, Najjar, Monaghan, Brown, and Collins wrote about the surveillance assemblage can be found in Israel's genocide. The surveillance assemblage of the past has been perfected and made into a killing machine. Boycotting these companies is the least you can do. We need a BUTLERIAN JIHAD. Hey, this is Lost Futures from the future. That was a very smooth transition, right? I want to add that AI surveillance is already in America and most Western countries. It's why Israel was able to so easily deploy it in Lebanon and Gaza. Your governments are currently investing billions in AI to enhance their surveillance capabilities. When I was planning and writing this video, I wanted to dedicate it to Palestinians and my people in Lebanon. So linked below are articles on American AI surveillance for those curious and have keen eyes and ears. I see you people. I can read your minds. Okay, it's BUTLERIAN JIHAD time. Let's go. There's a book out there called How to Bomb a Pipeline. And I think we need a new book called How to Bomb an AI Data Center. On the surface, when AI was being hyped, data centers weren't really questioned. Most companies avoided answering, what's in these data centers? What data is it collecting? Is AI simply going to use all of the data ever made to make slop? Is it an AI bot farm? A slop farm? The truth is, what most of these AI data centers do is confidential. The construction of these sites are sometimes done in secret or in remote, unreachable places where there's a lot of water or in cold conditions. The usage of power and water these data centers use should be enough for most people to be against AI. But there are AI bros and boomers who are very pro-AI, who see the slop AI makes as a technological marvel that must be reveled in, who actually believe AI data centers should just cover the world. When I first saw an AI data center, I did not revel in its creation and what it could do for the future of mankind. I saw it as a tool of war, a building that could potentially house millions of profiles. I saw it as a building for surveillance.
When most of us think about cloud storage, we don't imagine a physical space. Like, I know that when I upload something to Dropbox, that has to end up on a server somewhere, but I don't really think about the physical infrastructure very often. Like, it happens in the ether, it happens in the cloud. But of course, in reality, there is an enormous physical component to all of that. And those files, they end up somewhere like this, a data center belonging to Microsoft in Middenmeer, North Holland. Actually, this isn't just one data center. Microsoft describes it as a campus, currently taking up around 14 hectares of space, with construction set to break ground on a further 50. By the time they're done, this place will be nearly as big as Middenmeer itself. And we now know that for the last 2 years, these buildings, these exact buildings, have been the home to audio recordings of hundreds of millions of phone calls made by the people of Palestine. So many calls that if you were to try and dedicate a dozen lifetimes to listening to them one after the other, you wouldn't be able to do it. These phone calls, as we now know thanks to reporting from The Guardian alongside Plus 972 magazine and Local Call, were captured by an IDF intelligence agency known as Unit 8200.
AI is perfect for surveillance. It's like the internet on steroids, able to sort through intelligence in hours. You've probably been told a million times already that the FBI or CSIS or the Mossad are data mining your computers and phones, that they're able to build a profile on a person just by what they watch and search and send and download. It's an unavoidable situation for most. But AI is avoidable. You don't need to go on ChatGPT and tell it to write you an essay. You don't need to ask it for therapy. You don't need to ask AI for a color palette or a recipe, or to make you silly slop pictures or videos or anime clips. All you're really doing is feeding the AI data it so craves to learn, perfect itself, and spy on you. I'm also against AI because I think it kills the mind and the soul, kills the creative soul in a person, turns art into soulless slop. And the reliance on AI is harmful because it kills critical thinking. People are becoming too reliant on AI. Write me an essay, an email, record the script, make a picture, make me a video essay about surveillance. Answer all my questions that would require time and research and critical thinking. What is the human race becoming? My attitude towards AI might be extreme. Yeah, I see its values for answering random questions and finding research papers and for declicking or cleaning this audio. But I'm well aware of how surveillance works and how normal it is to feed something novel information. In the respect to AI as a tool of war, I want it dead and demolished. Not because I fear it will be used here in the West, but because it has already killed thousands of Palestinians and Lebanese people. I don't buy into the doomer's perspective that we're already in a dystopia, or we're in 1984. Those stories tell of a defeated people who never resist AI and surveillance. AI can be destroyed, and it can be resisted. Escaping surveillance comes with sacrifice. Sacrificing your Microsoft PC or MacBook. But with the level of surveillance on us right now, I'm in favor for doing things the old-fashioned way. Organizing in person, using Linux, ditching WhatsApp, Discord, and Instagram. If you're protesting, mask up and throw your phone away. The change might be jarring for most, but I honestly think it's worth it. You could also help others who don't want to sacrifice by removing Israeli and American spyware, by warning others to not scan random-ass QR codes, or jump ship to age verify you or your children or your parents. We should not give any of these companies verification. Don't do it. Don't age verify, okay? Don't age verify. You're just giving biometric data to the to whatever company who's going to sell your data off to the highest bidder. Or you can be brave. You can be fearless and let the state watch you, surveil your every move and action. Let them come. Let them watch us, imprison us, and torture us. But if you're going to be that fearless, don't go around normalizing surveillance, normalizing AI, because this shit isn't normal, and it deserves to be resisted and torn apart. If you haven't heard, AI surveillance is already present in the West, and Planter is leading the charge. Smart cities like Atlanta, Toronto, Madrid, London are already incorporating AI surveillance. ICE has been using AI surveillance since Biden was in office. Stop warning people that AI surveillance is being brought home, that it's being brought to the West. It's already here, and we need to organize to fight and dismantle it. Those who are standing and fighting for the liberation of Palestine have been watched for years. It might scare you, and it's meant to scare you. Surveillance is a weapon of war, a weapon for social control and discipline. It's a form of psychological warfare, and yet I look at the people of Iraq, Yemen, southern Lebanon, and Palestine, fierce people, under the watchful eye of Western imperialism, and in their actions, in their resistance to fascism and colonialism, there is no fear, there is no hesitation. Those who openly resist America and Israel have unspeakable courage, and have been able to escape Israeli and American surveillance. The leader of the Islamic resistance Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, was fighting on the front lines with his men. The man was not hiding in a tunnel or escaping to Egypt, but openly fighting. It was by chance that the Israeli genocidal state found and executed him. The genocidal state may boast that it killed Sinwar, that it used Israeli intelligence to find him, but in his final moments, he sat there, waiting, resisting until his final breath. Sinwar may be called a terrorist by Israelis and Americans like Asmongold and Ethan Klein and ContraPoints, but in my view, he was the ideal leader and resistance fighter. He's a man we should learn from, and his guerrilla tactics show us that surveillance that we so fear is not as perfect and spot on as the West says it is. If we follow Sharma and Najjar's finding made in 2018, we can see cracks in modern surveillance. That modern surveillance is unable to find terrorists. The majority of those who it marks as terrorist were and are not terrorists. It is a flawed system, an irrational system. In the future, surveillance scholars may write articles on Israel's genocide, and I hope and pray to God that they include the fact that Israel did not only use this technology to hunt and murder what they deem terrorists. The majority of the terrorists the AI surveillance found were non-combatants, men, women, and kids massacred because an AI marked them as part of Hamas or Hezbollah. Surveillance scholars must show teeth in this regard, and they must state the truth about what surveillance is really used for. In occupied Palestine and Lebanon, it is containment, genocide, and ethnic cleansing. In America, Canada, and Europe, it is mass deportation and hunting down anyone who is brave enough to stand against Israel and American imperialism. It's time we stop dancing and walking on thin ice when talking about the aims of surveillance. It's time for us to disregard theory that solely focuses on social control and focus more on chaos and methods of disruption. It's about time for those of us in the belly of the beast to stop being paranoid and paralyzed with fear. Are we to shake and tremble forever? Are we to be passive and commit to non-action, to inaction, and non-violence? Are we to continue to normalize surveillance and teach those growing up in this fucked up world spineless pacifism? I wish to echo the words and the actions of the revolutionaries in Haiti, the indigenous peoples, who resisted and are resisting colonialism, fierce fighters of the past and the present who were subjected to fascist surveillance. Huey P. Newton, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, George Lester Jackson, Frantz Fanon, and Yahya Sinwar. Let's break the chains that surveillance has around us and be fearless. Let's organize and watch the watchers, destroy and dismantle AI systems brick by brick, and spit on the Nazi Asmongolds of the world who want to date and fuck AI anime girls, as their state cleanses anyone who isn't white anyone who is against Israel, anyone who is against American imperialism. Free Palestine and death to AI. Kept you waiting, huh? Hey, welcome to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video worthy of your time, make sure to like, comment, and share this video around. Show it to Asmongold. Show it to Asmongold fans. Show it to ContraPoints. Share it to Ethan Klein. Just force Ethan Klein to watch one of my videos. Please, it would be so funny. After the last video, my life went on a bit of a roller coaster. Chaos erupted around me. Fires of hell danced around me. Demons. Yes, literal demons flocked around me. The truth is, I was prepping myself to take a job in IT. I studied everything I could and went into the job interview. After the interview, I learned the company was partnered with Microsoft. Unlike those who, mind you, continue to operate the AI death machines, I took a principled stance and rejected the job. I won't work for a place that gives money to a company that has Palestinian and Lebanese blood on their hands. After that, I couldn't write, couldn't sit down and plan a video. The American war on Iran and the Israeli bombing of my country intensified, also halted my creativity. My family in Lebanon legit laughed at me. When I showed concern, they said, "The mountains protect us." Anywho, I want to genuinely apologize to my subscribers for being so late. There are now over 10,000 of you. I want to personally thank each and every one of my subscribers. Thanks, 10,000. I'm sad to say AI was used in the making of this video. I use AI to clean my audio, but it's a declicker that doesn't send any data to Microsoft, and it doesn't quote-unquote create anything. All it does is scrub the thousands of clicks in my audio. I also listen to your critiques and feedback by toning down on the anime clips and the background music. When I was writing this video, I finally understood where the feedback was coming from, and I hope I showed some improvement and took this topic seriously. Sorry if the audio is bad in some parts. My computer stopped recognizing my mic and gave me an MME error. So parts of this video were re-recorded, and I tried to talk faster, but ended up sounding very dead and tired. I know it sounds like shit. There's also clipping noises where I don't peek. It just clips. If I clickbaited you with Asmongold, I apologize. I know I didn't speak about what a monster he is, nor did I show clips of him saying that he loves and wants to date AI anime girls. That shit is too disturbing. I'm sorry. I couldn't do it. I don't have the heart to show Asmongold in my videos, okay? What else? Alright, the next video will be on Jewish supremacy. I still need to organize my thoughts and maybe contact Bestie Marks, but I want to jump in and talk about it from a historical point of view. If you watched till the end, let me know your thoughts about this more professional style, or do you prefer my old style, where I use anime clips and memes to express humor and lighten the mood. I seriously want to know which is better, the boring slideshow kind of video where it's like, here's my citations, this is where I'm getting my research, I'm not talking about this from my ass, this is not AI, versus, 1,000 anime clips. I know I'm still gonna have some people come after me for using 5 anime clips. But 5 anime clips is nothing. It's nothing compared to 100 or 200 anime clips. Okay? Give me a break. Give me a break. Thanks for watching this video. It means a lot. I'll see you in the next one. Maybe. Bye.